Hi, everybody. Welcome to Advanced Programming with Java here at Portland State University. We are in week 6, so entering the second half of the course. Things are going to get more complex, hopefully more interesting. Also, we got some good stuff coming up over the next couple of weeks, including 3 sessions of mob programming, which start next week. But tonight, after some Prime Minister's questions, we'll spend most of our time together talking about Project 5. We got a little introduction to it last week. This week we are diving deep, looking at the code, understanding all of the pieces parts. So this is one of those weeks where you'll be watching me do a lot of programming. But remember that I do this for your benefit, so please feel free to ask questions along the way. I'm going to turn up the volume here in the room a little bit. Maybe. There we go. But before we get started, I did want to take a moment and acknowledge the tragedy of mass shooting that occurred this week at the Michigan State University campus in Lansing. Just like you, I'm part of a university, and even though this is a public place in a public space, I want to be safe, and it's a place of learning and a place of exploration, and to have that violated is just as unconscionable as any other mass shooting. But for me, and probably for many of you, it's a little bit closer to home because this is a place that we too are part of our campus and part of a college community. So I just wanted to acknowledge that here at the beginning. And I just appreciate you all for your participation, people that are here in the room, people who are continuing to be a part of our campus and our university as we move forward. And I guess also I want to take the opportunity to say if you are struggling with life, with your emotions, with your reactions to things, the university has many resources that are available to help you navigate the challenges that you're facing, and certainly anything related to the course. Please feel free to reach out to me, and I'll provide whatever guidance and resources I can. I don't want anybody suffering from any ailment, whether it be mental, physical, or otherwise. Okay, let's open up for some Prime Minister's questions. So it's been another week, and I know people have been working on the XML project, and maybe some people have started thinking about Project 5. We had the cones due today. What questions remain? What can I tell you? What can I show you to give you the information that you need to be successful over the next couple of weeks? During office hours, there were a couple of questions about Project 4. Thanks, Matt, for saying that you enjoy the 2-week project deadlines. I think that means, yeah, you have a little bit more time between projects because they're kind of bigger. But yeah, just as always, don't get far behind because it'll be difficult to catch up. There were some things I wanted to talk about with regards to Project 4, the XML project. So let's see here. Here in the Airline project, when it was created, there are several things. A question came in for Project 4 when validating actual data in the file, that is the source of a valid airport. Do we need to provide an airline number with the error message? No, you don't. I mean, that would be nice if you did so, and if you catch the right exception, you can. But actually, that kind of validation for the airport being valid, no, you don't need to have a line number with that. There are, here in the test resources directory, there are a couple of XML files that provide the format. And a couple of people asked, well, how do I see the document type definition, the DTD? And I think as some people noticed that the URL that's in the assignment, because it's a PDF, has a funny tilde character, not funny tilde character, a high-ASCII tilde character, not the usual one that'll work in a URL. Unfortunately, though, these days, when you go to open this file inside a browser, which I'll do now, it thinks it's an XML file and can't render it. I suppose you can probably download it and look at it that way. But the easiest way to look at the DTD is in IntelliJ. If you control click or command click into it, it ought to open up the file which is inside a jar. So at runtime, your code gets the DTD by loading it as a resource from the jar. And actually, that's one of the things that the Airline helper class, Airline XML, sorry, helper class, I believe takes care of. So if you go look at its superclass, it has the superclass here. So the whole idea of the project XML helper, and then there's the Airline XML helper, which is the subclass of it, is that it provides implementations of the standard error handler interface and entity resolver interface, which we learned about in the lecture, so that you don't have to. I thought this would be a nice convenience. It's a little less boilerplate code that you have to write. And so then when it goes to resolve an entity, and the DTD that you specify in your XML file is considered an entity, which means that it is some data that lives outside of that individual file, that individual XML document. So when it goes to look for that, ultimately, this resolve entity method is called, and it gives the public ID and the system ID. And it says, hey, if this is the public ID that's associated with this XML helper, so it's like this guy right here, or the system ID, then it goes and loads the DTD file as a resource. You all have been using this resource API in some of your tests and everything. Here's another place that uses it. And simply goes and loads that stream and then returns it as this input source type. Oh, otherwise, I suppose if it can't find it locally, then it goes and uses the URL, which should be able to find it locally every time. But the intent here is that this all you are relatively isolated from all of that. And so the way that you're intended to use the XML helper is here when you use the DOM API, like the document builder factory and things like that. You can set the error handler and entity resolver to the helper object, and then that will use the helper object methods for reporting errors and for resolving things like DTDs. Now, another question that came up, a couple people asked about, how do I indent, or do I need to indent? And then how do I get the DTD in my XML document to print out here in the doc type? And the way you do that, actually, if you, I have one of the examples in the family jar here, which you can find. Oops, let me get this person in. This actually shows you how to use the DOM API to build a different kind of XML. But I think the important thing to note here is this code. Oops, it uses the transformer factory and the transformer, which you might be using in your code already. But here's where you can do things like say yes to indenting, and here's where you can specify these output properties, the system ID and the public ID. And then when you transform your whatever it is that you're transforming, probably a DOM source into a stream result, it will go and generate that stuff in the XML. Now, the meta lesson of Project 4 is not so much how to build XML. I mean, this isn't something you'll probably do every day, but more likely, but what I'm intending it to be is a lesson in using kind of a slightly esoteric, but certainly very public API. So things like this aren't meant to necessarily be super intuitive. It's a matter of understanding what's there in the lecture notes and then applying it in the project. Any other questions? Nope. Okay. How are the cones? Follow people finishing them up and submitting them. Any thoughts that people would like to share about their experiences working on the cones? What do they think? Was it useful? Did it help? Did it hinder? Useful? Yeah. Oh, interesting. Right, right, right. Yeah, there were a couple of them that were kind of tricky, and even I think that was the one. There was one I think we were looking at it last time, where it was it was like 1, 2, 3, and they had an array, and then they turned it into a list. I wasn't sure exactly what that was supposed to be, but they're meant to make you think and say, hey, you get the right answer and you move on. Excellent. Um, let's see here. Oh, thanks, Max and Adam. Sounds like yeah, they were nice and helpful. Oh yeah, prompting the answer. Yeah. Um, It's oh, and Adam noted something on GitHub too. Nice, thanks. Yeah, maybe doing them earlier. It's always a balance because it's so there's a large volume of them and it covers like the entire Java language. And so I wouldn't want to have that be like the first assignment. Everybody do that in week 1. So yeah, it's a balance. Yeah, and the whole prompting with the answer. Yeah, I've often thought it's like, well, hey, should we go in and modify it so like it gives you a couple of guesses, and if you don't get it on the third try or second try or whatever, then it prompts you with an answer. That'd probably be a good project for someday. Yeah, nice. Okay. Anything else for Prime Minister's questions? No. Hearing none, let's close the tabs and start talking about Project 5. So Project 5, I introduced it last week, and this is a further evolution of your airline application, but it's a big it's a big evolution. It's a big step. We're going from basic command line programs to 2 Java programs that run concurrently that communicate over communicate using REST, communicating over HTTP using REST. And I'm going to scroll down to the architectural diagram. There are 2 parts to this. One is the command line program, and the other one is a Java web application. And we saw last week, we saw a couple things last week. First of all, we created the Maven project. So in Project 5, you create a new Maven project that allows you to build a Java web application, and then you copy a number of your classes into that Maven project, so you can have your airline, your flight, and your XML dumper, and all that kind of stuff. And you'll probably want to keep some code from your main class too. But there's new stuff, like something called a servlet, and there are tests for all of this stuff. So then this is all part of the assignment. Is starting over with a new project, bringing over just the stuff that you need, and then working with it. And as we saw out of the box, when you run it, so over here on the right, I'm going to start up the web server, if you will, the web application, by running maven w jetty run. Jetty is the name of, it's actually a Java program. It's a Java program that is a web server, if you will. And so Jetty runs, and then what Maven does is that it deploys the code from the project, the web application that's built in the project, into Jetty. And it hosts it running on port 8080 by default. You can see the assignment that it can be changed, but port 8080 is what it runs by default. And so this is our regular old web server. So actually, I probably got something right here. Yep. So if you hit the machine localhost, which is the machine that's running that the browser is running on port 8080, it returns back some content saying 404 not found, and gives you a link off to your airline. So when you hit this URL, it brings up this HTML page that allows you to interact with the application. And out of the box, the application is a simple dictionary. You have words and their definitions. And so then, you saw me do the, and yeah, a little wider thing there. You saw how last week how you can use the HTML form to populate the dictionary. And so now when we look at all of them, you can see all the dictionary entries. But there is also a command line program that, small, there you go. Let's see here, airline client.jar. Oops. Sorry, executable jar. Where if you give it the host ports, it'll interact with it also. And so then the command line program ends up making an HTTP request off to the server just like the web page does. So then all the operations that you can perform through that form, you can also perform through the command line tool. That's what we saw last week, and that's where we're going to start this week. So those are the pieces parts. If you haven't put together the project yet, I recommend that you do that maybe during a break, or take your focus away from that, from this for a little bit to get things set up, because now we're going to talk about the code itself. So, oops, I want to go back to the assignment actually. So let's talk about what the assignment is and what you do. So as always, there is some code that you will implement in your package. There is a class called Airline Servlet, and so then I hope you've watched the lecture, but the whole idea is that a servlet is a Java object that runs, that is created inside the web container, inside the web application, inside the web container, that responds to HTTP requests. And HTTP, there's notion of a verb in HTTP, which is what action you want to perform. So there's like an HTTP GET, which says, hey, here is a URL, here is a resource, and I want you to tell me what it is. So like, hey, all of the flights in an airline, tell me what that is. Similarly, there is a post verb that is meant to send data or create data in a web application. And so you use these verbs to do various things with various URLs. So for the URL /airline/flights (airline equals name), if you send a GET request to that, it will return all the flights in the airline with the given name, formatted using the XML number. So you hit that URL and it sends back the XML for that airline. If you send a post request to that URL, that will create a new flight in the airline with a given name. And there are there are parameters that you send to the post, like in addition to airline, there's flight number, source, depart, dest, and arrive. When you send all of those parameters to that URL, that will create a new flight in the airline, with the given information. And note that if an airline doesn't exist yet, a new one should be created. So it's kind of the same semantics as your old command line application. So as you can see, this is what you do. This is how you interact with the web application, like you would your command line program from projects 1, 2, 3, and 4, right? You can. Well, actually, I get just the post. Yeah, post. This is how you create flights in your airline. But now, instead of creating it in a file, you've already demonstrated that you can save stuff to a file. You're going to be storing stuff inside a web application. Now, there's some new capabilities in Project 5. And one of them is that you can now search for flights that meet certain criteria. So if you send a GET request to the URL /airline/flights !airline equals a certain name, source equals an airport code, and destination equals an airport code, it'll return all of the flights that originate at the source airport and terminate at the destination airport. And so if you haven't picked it up on it already, the web application will support multiple airlines. So instead of like having multiple files for multiple airlines, you just have different URLs for those airlines. So ultimately, that's what the web application needs to do. It needs to support these URLs. Now, those are just a bunch of URLs that you can hit, that you can load, you can request. Now you need a way to interact with them. And the way you're going to interact with them is through a command line program. So you can interact through the browser, but I'm not going to sit there and click and input a bunch of data into the browser. That seems slow. Instead, I'm going to have, I'm asking you to create a program that sends HTTP requests to the server, and that are created from the contents of the command line. And so the command line looks a little bit like it did in projects 1 through 4. Here the arguments are, I guess, exactly the same. So the airline, the flight, the source, depart, destination, arrive. All all the dates and times are in the same format as project 3 and 4. So the 12-hour flights, sorry, 12-hour times. But now you've got some options. So you can have an option to you say, here's what the host is, here's what the port is. You still have print and readme, but now you have this search, and so that will search for flights. It'll search for flights, and then it will then it'll pre-print the flight out to standard out. So note that the HTML, or sorry, note that the URL returns XML, but the command line program does is pre-prints the flights. Here are some examples. So here's how you add a flight to a server that's running on localhost port 12345. You invoke your program pretty much like you'd expect it from Project 4, coming from Project 4. To search for a flight between 2 airports, in this case, PDX and LAS, you just give it the host, the port, and -search, so you don't give it dates and times. And then finally, if you want to print all of the flights in an airline, you just give it the host and port, as well as the name of the airline. So not only are you learning about Java web applications, but you're also adding some new functionality to your airline. As always, the command line program should exit gracefully when things go wrong. So syntax command line is bad, or there's malformed input. You can't connect to the server, or if the data that's passed the REST URL is not formatted correctly. Note, though, that your server side should not exit if there's bad data to it, right? You don't want to crash your web servers because you sent it a malformed date. And so then we'll see how error handling works in Java servlets and with HTTP. Let's see here. You've already run the create REST project. There's no more command line. There's no more CMD script anymore. And we've seen how to run all this stuff. Oh, an important note here. There is an index.html, and that's what generates this page right here. This is for demonstration and for experimental purposes only. It's not something that gets submitted with the other code. If you are like an HTML form wizard and you want to evolve that to work with your project, great. If that helps you develop it, but it's not something that's part of your grade. It isn't required for you to change as your web application changes as you evolve from the dictionary application, which comes out of the box, to your airline. You'll probably hear me say this a couple of times. This project is, by its nature, just all the more complex because you're doing distributed programming. You've got two programs, two processes that are talking to each other. And so there's just more things to keep in your head as you are working on your project. Please plan your time appropriately. Oh, let's see here. Some other notes. There is examples of other servlets, like the family tree servlet, that might be helpful for you. We will see how to use the HTTP request helper class, which makes it helps the client, the command line program, make requests more easily. If you're running on the PSU machines, you may need to run Jetty on a port other than 8080 because other students are running something else on 8080. And so you can do that by setting -d jetty.http.port when you run Maven. And note that the only thing that gets submitted it's your source code, so your Java files and your resources and things like that. Specifically, your Maven pom.xml will not be submitted, and the web.xml, which configures web application, that's not going to be submitted either. So please don't make changes to those. So that's the assignment. That specifies what needs to be done. Now, before we dive into how you do this, are there any questions that you have about the requirements of the assignment? Yeah. Oh, sorry, you submit it using the submit.sh program, the script. Yeah, good question. Yeah. Oh, I saw a question came in also. Is the midterm survey all that's due for midterm work? Correct, there's not like a midterm exam or anything like that. No. Project 5, it's a lot. Let's start looking at the code. Okay, I think for me, the map of the world here will help orient what we're doing. Let's take a look at what's happening in the web application. So let's take a look at that airline servlet. Now, airline servlet. Now, a servlet is long ago, the Java folks put together a standard API for writing web applications. And basically what it does is at the lowest level, it abstracts out and represents interaction with a web server over HTTP using Java objects and classes and things like that. And there's something called a servlet. So this is an application that is served up. And you'll learn all about this in the lecture. This HTTP servlet class represents something that can process HTTP requests. And so there's this, and so what you do is you implement a subclass of HTTP servlet to provide the functionality of your web application. And so then this provides a nice abstraction for Java programmers, something that's familiar. And also because there is, because HTTP servlet is a standard class. It comes from this Java X servlet package. It means that it's your contract between your web application and then the thing that runs your web application, which is the Jetty. So Jetty knows how to interact with HTTP servlets, and the fact that you provide with a subclass of it, well, that's great. It doesn't care because you've programmed to the interface, because you've conformed to the contract specified by HTTP servlet. They'll know how to interact with your particular servlet, which in this case is Airline servlet. So if we look at the methods of our Airline servlet overrides methods like do get and do post. And so when the web server, when the web application receives an HTTP GET request, that request is ultimately routed to this do get method here. And so we'll go into this in the lecture, but basically HTTP is just a bunch of text over a socket. Right? At the end of the day, that's what it is. And it's text of a specific format. And if you go and look at the protocol, it specifies things like, here's the URL I want, well, here's the host, here's the URL, or right, here's the host, here's the resource, and it has the, it has like the type of data. It has the, maybe I guess the size is in there too. Something else I was going to say that was really important. Well, and then of course, if you're, that's for HTTP GET, and then if you're doing a post and you're sending a payload along with that, then that payload is encoded there in the HTTP request. And really the job of your web container, your job of Jetty, is to take that raw HTTP request, parse through it, make sure it's all valid, and then get it to the right place, get it to the right object, send it to the right object. So it says, great, I got an HTTP GET request. I'm going to find the appropriate servlet, call its do get method, and I'm going to represent the information that comes along with that request in an instance of a class called HTTP servlet request. And so now you've got a Java interface to this HTTP request. And so what methods like do get do is that they take that request, they get the information that they want out of it, and then they create a response based on that. And so here, when we go and get something, so the first thing we do is we say, well, the type of data I'm going to send back to the client is text.plain. So you say response.setContentType text/plain. And so this is preparing the response, the thing that goes back to that ultimately, the response object is something that the doGet method will configure, will interact with. And then when the doGet method returns, the servlet code, the Jetty code that invoked it will look at the response, and from that create an HTTP encoded response with all the right stuff for the protocol and send that back to the client. The nice thing is that you don't need to worry about all that HTTP processing code. You just interact with these objects. And so what does the doGet do? Well, and actually let's just look at this in the browser. So here, let's look for the word do, because this will be a get. This does a get of this URL, so /airline/flights word equals do. Now, in a URL, this is all the resource. Basically, it's saying, hey, listen, I want to interact with the flights. And then there's the query of that resource, which is to the right of the question mark. And you send in these key value pairs, which is the first thing is the key of the key value pair is like the name of the parameter. And it's saying, so tell me all of the flights, in this case, the dictionary, where the word equals do. Alternatively, if I don't pass in anything, bad example because there's only one thing here. Sorry, let me go put another one in. Drop on. Great. So it's reload, and I said now I want to do an HTTP. Get. If I have no query parameters, then I get all of them. Otherwise, the query parameter will be word equals When I say word equals do, it just returns do. So that's the behavior. How is that implemented? That's all there in the servlet. So when the doGet method is invoked, we call this getParameter method, which is a helper method that says basically returns the value of the request parameter. In this case, the request parameter is that with the given name, and takes care of the fact that it might be equals or have no value or be an empty string. So there's a little helper method there. And so we get the parameter. And if the parameter is null, well, first, sorry, the parameter is not null, then it writes the definition for that word. Otherwise, if it is null, then it writes all the dictionary entries. And that's how you get the behavior of, well, here's, here's Ray, and then here is all of the all the things in the dictionary. Now, I want to walk you through more of this, but I think the way I want to do that isn't so much here looking at the code. I want to debug this. So we really haven't talked that much about debugging in this class because we've been doing so much text. Oh, sorry, was that a question? Okay. Does question mark in the URL mean it's a GET request? No, you can have, well, let's see here. No, you can also post to a GET, but when you enter a URL into the browser URL field, it's always an HTTP GET. In order to do a post through a browser, it's from like a form or something in the back end, like an AJAX call. So really what makes it a GET request is the fact that I entered it into the browser, or I have an HTML form here. Let's just go look at the HTML form. Index.html. Here's my very 1996 style HTML. Oh, I'm using divs. Sorry, 1998 style HTML with forms of with a method of get or a method of post. Again, this is here for people who understand, or people who know what this stuff is all about and are comfortable with it. This is actually something that was originally developed by one of the students, and he was like, "Hey, this might make it easier." I was like, "Okay," and so I included it. Sorry, I was talking about debugging. So, if you're doing test-driven development, you usually don't need to do a lot of debugging. And while you can do test-driven development with this project, it's kind of challenging. And so then you really need to write tests, and you'll have good test coverage. And we'll talk later about how to do all of that. But let's walk through the code in the debugger. I think that might be a little helpful. So what we need to do is we need to run our. I'm going to stop Jetty. And actually, now that I've done that, if we try to interact with the application, we get connection refused, right? Because it's not working. Now, in Java, there's a special incantation that you can put with the JVM that will tell it, hey, run such that a debugger can be attached. And the way you get that, the easiest way to get that magical invocation in IntelliJ is to create a new run configuration. And I don't know if you've worked with this or not, so we'll go through it now. So the whole idea is that this is a configuration for running for a Java program. So you want to add a new one of type remote. There you go, remote JVM debug. And we will just call this, well, let's see here, debug local Jetty on port 5005. And so the whole idea here is that this will allow IntelliJ to to debug and communicate with our Jetty. It doesn't happen over HTTP. I know this is confusing because there are actually multiple ports involved. There's a port for HTTP, and then there is a port for debugging. The port for debugging will be 5005. We're going to debug on localhost, but it is possible to debug on a remote machine as long as the socket's open, which is actually pretty cool. It's something I do pretty often. So there is a command line argument that you need to send to the Java VM. In this case, it'll be the Maven Java VM. And let's see here. Server yes, suspend no, that's fine. So the way that you do this, and there's some more details about this in the README for your repository, I'm pretty sure. But what you do is you set an environment variable called Maven ops. So these are the Java command line options to Maven. and you put in the value of this thing right here, this dash agent lib. Basically what this is saying is it's telling the JVM, hey, please start, let's see here. Please open up a socket on port 5005 for a debugger to attach to. And suspend equals no means like start executing your code, don't wait for the debugger to attach before executing. And in order to tell Maven to use that, you need to set this Maven underbar ops environment variable. And now we'll run Jetty again. And actually, if you notice, the first thing it prints out is now listening for transport DT underbar socket at address 5005. And so that means that there is a, it's listening for the debugger to attach. Okay, so it looks like, okay, it looks like everything has started up okay. And now here in IntelliJ, when I select the debug local Jetty on port 5005 run configuration, and I click debug, it's now attached to my Jetty VM on port 5005. So remember what I was saying about distributed programming? We're going to see a lot of stuff all going on at the same time, right? Because we've got 2 Java programs and we're debugging them. It's a lot, but it all works, and it's what's necessary when you've got all these concurrencies going on. So I don't know how many of you have used a visual debugger before. So please stop me if I'm doing something that looks completely unfamiliar. I'll try to go what I think is the appropriate speed. So in a debugger, what you communicate is, hey, where are the places that I want to stop debugging, right? Or I want to stop the program execution and debug. And the way you do that in IntelliJ is that you click over here in the margin and you get a red dot, which is, this is putting a breakpoint at that line, which means when that code is executed, the execution will stop and allow you to inspect things inside the debugger. So now and basically where I stopped it was inside the get method, the do get method. So now when I perform a, actually, well, let me populate some things first because I've lost all my context because I only save things in memory. So there's doe, a deer, a female deer. Let's do Ray. Thank you. Sun. Great. Okay, now when I list all word definition pairs, I click submit, and then IntelliJ popped to the front because I've now hit my breakpoint. I called my I did my HTTP GET request, and that resulted in my doGet method being called, and now here we are. So now we're here in the debugger. And in the debugger, you get a lot of interesting stuff down here in the debug window. You get a call stack. So here's all of the code that's being run. And here at the top is my doGet method. But look at the code that calls it, right? Java X Servlet stuff inside the Jetty, and look at all this, crazy stuff here that's on the stack, right? Who knew? Yeah, I suppose if you got an exception, you'd see all this stuff. But the whole idea here is that your code is being invoked from a very large, or from a much larger Jetty system. But you don't care. You just wrote your code, and now it's executing. And over here on the right is some code that lets you inspect the data that is being involved, the data that is live and active here on this line of code. So this doGet method sent in a request and response object. And this request object here tells you what type it is, okay, or so some Jetty request object. And it has information like, okay, here's the HTTP method, here's the path. Oh, this is kind of some very internal stuff. That's kind of confusing. But this is an object, and it's got the contract of the HTTP servlet request. So what I can do is, if I want to get more information about the request, I can say evaluate expression, and this lets you type in some Java code. So like I'm just going to say request dot, let's see here, get, can I get all the parameters? Get parameter names. And this returns a collection of size 0 because I clicked, show me all of the items in the dictionary. But as you can see, I really like, when I have to go in the debugger, I really like the debugger that I have because it allows me to do all sorts of stuff with the objects, and helps me really understand what's going on. So I like evaluating expressions a lot. Oh yeah, question from Adam.
Yeah, so if you're evaluating an expression that would normally like change the data field of the object, does it actually do that in the debugger in this one?
It does, right? You are dealing with the live objects. So I don't think I have a good example here, but if you call a method that changes the state, that's the state of the object. So yeah, it's kind of wild. You start getting in there and doing like open heart surgery on your program. So most of the time, you just want to shine your flashlight and see everything. Sorry, doctors don't use flashlights. But anyway, you basically want to root around in there and sort of see what everything's going on. You don't want, you may or may not want to make changes. When you debug, sometimes it's good. It's like, oh look, the value was the wrong thing. Okay, what if I change it to this? What happens? But most of the time, you're just doing sort of read-only inspection. Great question.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so we've used the expression evaluator to look at various objects. Right now, we are at this one line of code. And what you can do is you can then navigate. You can step through your code. And there are various ways of doing that. There is step over, which will simply go to the next line, so it'll execute that method. There is step into, which will, when you execute that method, it will debug into that. We'll see an example there. Step out will actually run the current method to the end and then stop the debugger at the code that called this method. And then run to cursor is, well, you can put a cursor someplace and it'll run until it hits the line of code the cursor's on. And then there's also a resume program, which will basically say, just keep running. So don't stop anymore until you hit the next breakpoint. So let's use the step over to go to the next line. Interestingly enough, IntelliJ tells you what the toString value of the response object is. That's nice. It's okay. Now now we're going to call get parameter. So let's step into that. So when you step into that line of code, now we're in the get parameter method. And we can do things like if we just highlight this right here and you say evaluate expression. Let's assuming I didn't use the highlight there. Nope, there it is. Press get parameter. Oh, that's going to return null. Well, that's interesting. So now, as I navigate, sure enough, I guess I'm going to hover over it and see that the value is null, but I can also see it down here in the variable watcher. And so now I can see that, oh yeah, my parameter was null, so I'm going to return null from this method. Okay, and now that word is null, I'm going to write all the dictionary entries to my response. Let's take a look at how that's done by stepping into that. Okay, so the HTTP servlet response is an object that represents the content that you're going to send back to the client in the response. And so then it has information like the content type, and we saw, if we go back up here, the first thing that we did in this method is that we set the content type to text plain, which says, hey, I'm sending back plain text. But that's just the type. Now there's the content of the response. And the way, the content of a response is, well, payload. It's a document, it's data. And if it's text data that you're sending back, well, in Java, how do you write text to some destination? You use a Java I/O print writer. So one of the things I really like about the Servlet API is that it leverages existing APIs for doing things that ought to be familiar, like sending, like sending, like sending text to some destination. Well, looks like a question came in. So let's see here. So evaluating expression lets you peek at the expression before you step over it, and we see the evaluation after it's executed. Yes. Yep, yeah, the whole idea is that it lets you inspect your data. That's what evaluating expression does. So when I want to write all of the dictionary entries to the HTTP servlet response, the first thing I do is I get the print writer associated with that response, and then I just do print writer stuff with it, right? This is like, this is project 2 stuff. So I get my print writer, and then here I'm just going to call I'm going to create a text dumper, which is just like your text dumpers. And then I'm going to call, I'm going to dump the contents of the dictionary, which is just a hash map of strings, to that dumper, and we can step through it. We can step into that. Oops, that's interesting. It says that it's. Oh, this is probably the wrong text dumper, isn't it? Interesting. It's getting the one from the airline. That's kind of interesting. I'm going to now say step out. Good. Now I'm back here. So it's written the description of the dictionary to the print writer from the HTTP server response, and then the last thing that you do is set the status of the response. So in HTTP, every response comes back with a status saying basically whether or not there was an error, and if so, what kind of error. Right? We all see the 404. What a 404 not found is the standard error code for, hey, you asked for a resource and it wasn't found. And we send back here, it's a 200, which is servlet code, or wherever SC stands for OK. But as you can see, there are tons of constants here for all of the various and sundry HTTP codes that you can think of. So anyway, okay, so we've written all the dictionaries, everything was successful, and so we return, and so we're going to set the status to 200. And that's it. Actually, if we keep stepping here, we will find ourselves off in Jetty code. It doesn't have the source code, so really what we want to do here is we just want to say, yep, resume program. And so now we're done debugging, and now we have the contents that were written by our text dumper are now sent back to the client. So the whole idea here is that you've got this servlet class, which provides the functionality of your web application. And here we just walked through what happens when you do a get and provide no arguments. But then when you have like word equals dough, I sent the HTTP request, it then hit the breakpoint again for do get. And now when I call get parameter, it's going to return dough, word will not be null. Then I'll take a slightly different tour through the code. I'll call the write definition method with the word and response. Oh, and now here's a good example. Well, we won't be able to see it now, but if definition was null, we return a 404, a not found. But instead what we do is we will then print just the one word there. Oh, interesting. I kind of cheat a little bit the way I do it. That's fine. I get the print writer again. I'm going to create a dummy dictionary because it's the only thing I know how to dump right now. Here again, this is just the out of the box. You'll be smarter about it. Dump that definition and say OK. Now I get the 1. And now let's just say my word is me. Once again, in the debugger, the word is me. When I go into write definition, I'm going to ask the definition of that. The definition is null because I haven't defined that word. And so now I'm going to say the status is SC not found, which is a 404. And now I'm going to return from all this. I'm going to say keep going. And now, sure enough, in my browser, I get a page can't be found because an HTTP error 404 was returned. So that's, those are the interactions that the client, in this case the browser, has with the servlet. And all that is implemented here in the do-get method. And what these servlet methods do is get information from the request, such as the parameters, and then based on the values of those parameters, process it, come up with some response or some content, and send that content back to the client via the HTTP servlet response, setting the appropriate status code along the way. So that's a lot, and an introduction to servlets. Any questions about that?
So one step above the servlet, would that be like the web server?
Yeah.
Okay.
So going back to the diagram, there's a servlet. Well, actually, there's a servlet that lives inside the airline application. So you can have multiple servlets inside an application, and each servlet is associated with a part of the URL. So the way this is configured is that the airline application, so basically Jetty is configured to map anything that starts with /airline to the airline application, and then inside the airline application, it maps anything like /flights to airline servlet. But you could have, slash, I don't know, baggage, and where you could check your bags in or something like that, have it go to a different servlet from a different URL. But yeah, so the servlet's inside a web application inside a web container, which runs inside a JVM on a machine.
So like when people talk about like making a microservice, would that be like multiple different like web applications or multiple different servlets generally?
It depends. A microservice is usually its own process. So it would be its own Jetty, and it could have multiple web applications in there, I suppose, but it's micro. And so then really, I'm trying to think, most of the microservices that I've seen are really only one web application inside a container. And the web containers are pretty lightweight these days. And so then really all it is just a little bit of code that manages a couple of threads to convert the HTTP request into wherever it needs to go, and then send the payload back.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So this is a good place for a break. Let's take 12 minutes. We'll return at 6:40, and we'll continue our dive into the Project 5 code. Hey everybody, welcome back. So far what we've done is we have been talking about the do-get method of our servlet. And this method is invoked when the web server receives an HTTP GET request. And we walked through this and we saw how you can use the Java debugger to inspect objects like the request and the response. We got a feel for how to use those APIs. I want to do something similar for the do post method. So I will set a breakpoint here for do post. Let's just walk through this real quick. Now, do post. Actually, let's look at the index.html again. So a post, what it does is that you provide well, you can provide multiple inputs, which I suppose you can do on a get also. But multiple. Here we have multiple text inputs. So we'll have word, and it'll be a value. It'll have definition. It'll be a value, and then all that we pass the do post method. And the whole idea is that we distinguish between we have the two verbs so that you that you know to expect things like a data payload in a post, where a get, the whole idea is that you're just looking up the address of something, you're just looking up the URL of something, and so it's not nearly as complex or as large as a post. And the format of the underlying HTTP request is a little different. So now, in our web application here, we'll go back and here to our form. Me, a name, I call myself, and I click submit. Now it stops in the do post method. And so let's walk through what this does. So the first thing we're going to do is once again say, hey, listen, I'm going to return to you some plain text. And I hope kind of all are familiar. Oops. What did I do here? Oh, I set into content type. That was done. No, back in there. Content types, right? You know what MIME types and MIME encoding maybe. The whole idea is that, HTTP is a text-based protocol. However, you can send any type of data that you want over HTTP. And the way that the protocol specifies what type of data is via the content type. And so then, hey, here we're saying back to the client, oh yeah, I'm returning you some plain text. And for your XML, you want to say, hey, I'm sending back text/XML. This is XML. And so that way, as the client receives the response, the content type tells the client how to interpret it. Because you could have, image/GIF or a PDF document or whatever. And but it's all encoded as text. And so then this is a clue to the client on how to interpret and deal with the response that you're sending. That's what the content type is all about. And the request can also have a content type also. Actually, it probably does. Let's find out. Let's go evaluate an expression. Let's see here. Let's just do that. And then all the fakes. Oops, that's not what I wanted. Request.get content type. It comes in as, oh yeah, application, because it's an HTTP post, the content type is application/x-www-form-URL encoded. Okay, that's nice to know. Your application doesn't really care about this, but it could. And then it could also, let's see here, then if you like send it something like a PDF, I think that'll also be there as part of the content type. Or it'll be multi-part or something like that. So here we're walking through this code. And so now we're going to get the word parameter. And the word parameter is what was specified by this text field right here. So now we're going to get that, and the word is me. Now, if the word was, if the word parameter wasn't set, then this missing required parameter method would be invoked, which sets a 412 error code along with a message and sends an error back, an error condition back. Now, we can't generate that condition through the form, which is good, but if we could, that's what would happen. Word is not null. It makes the same check for definition. Make sure it's not null. And then now it does the logic, which is like, I got the word, I got the definition, I'm going to put it in my dictionary. And as far as the response, I am going to send back a little message saying define word as. And again, I get the print writer from the response. And then I will flush the print writer just to make sure everything gets written. And I'm going to say, yep, that was an okay, I was able to handle that request okay. And there you go. Define me as a name I call myself. And so those are the two primary methods of the servlet. There's also a do delete that I use for testing purposes. This is basically clears the dictionary, and so we'll see how this is used later on. So out of the box, the servlet is very simple. It maintains a dictionary application, and your job is to evolve this simple application into something that manages multiple airlines, each with their own flights. And so honestly, what your job is to adapt the implementations of do get and do post to meet the requirements that are specified up here in the description of the airline servlet here in the assignment. Okay. Any questions on get and post and those things in the servlet?
If somebody for the assignment, if somebody passes like a query string parameter, that's like not valid, can we like safely ignore that for this, or would we want to return an error in this scenario?
I think it's pretty conventional to ignore parameters that aren't recognized, and that's fine. Now, passing invalid data. So let's say you have a date or so you have a date and you pass in some malformat date. That should be detected by the servlet and returned as an error.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Seriously asks about how are you creating HTTP requests from the command line? We will get there. Don't worry. So you have your servlet. And actually, I'm just going to detach the debugger here because we won't be debugging the servlet anytime soon. I'll turn off the breakpoints too. Now, we have the servlet, but the servlet's got a lot of logic in it. And it's logic that you write, and you want to be able to test the servlet. Now, we just saw how to exercise the servlet, running it in Jetty, but it's kind of slow. But what you'd really like to have is an automated test for it. And you'd like it to be a fast running test. And wouldn't it be nice if you could test your servlet without having to like deploy or build your web application, deploy it in Jetty, and then run stuff about it? I'm sure you were asking yourself these questions. And of course, the answer is yes, there is a way to test it, but it's different from the unit tests that you've seen so far because this object, your servlet, usually runs inside a Jetty container and it expects to be running inside a servlet container. In a unit test, well, I suppose you could have a unit test start up the servlet container, but that would be slow. And really, is there a way that we can give this code enough information so that it thinks it's running inside a servlet even when it's not? And the answer is yes. So there is a class called Airline Servlet Test. And I am going to put, let's see here, split right, split move right. So I've got the Airline Servlet Test over on the left. I've got the Airline Servlet on the right. Now, so basically what I have here is a test that validates that initially a servlet, when it's created, it contains no dictionary entries. And basically what I want to do is I want to say, well, how do I test that? Well, I'm going to call do get, and I am going to assert that nothing is ever written to the HTTP servlet response, right? So when when there is nothing in the dictionary, nothing is written. And with nothing in the dictionary, and you ask for the contents of the dictionary, nothing is written. Cool. Okay. Well, in order to execute this code, I need to send it an HTTP servlet request and an HTTP servlet response. Now, I don't know how to create those objects, and this is like some API that comes from Java xservlet.http, and where am I going to do that? So if you watch, I believe it's the lecture, Foundations of the Web. Actually, it's covered in detail, I suppose, next week's dependency injection. But there is there is a style of unit testing in which you create mock objects. So the whole idea is that your code under test, this servlet, it has external dependencies. It depends on an HTTP servlet request and an HTTP servlet response. And in order for it to do its job, it needs these things. Now, if you want to create a real one, geez, you have to have a web container running, and there actually has to be a request to that, and that's kind of tricky to do all of that. Wouldn't it be nice if I can just give it objects that behave like HTTP servlet requests and HTTP servlet responses, but don't necessarily have to be have all the full-fledged Jetty stuff behind them? There is this library called Mockito that has some really kind of magical methods that will create what are called mock objects that allow you to, that provide the same, actually provide behavior that you can specify that provides the HTTP server request and HTTP server response interfaces. So the way you do that is, here in this code, the first thing we're going to do is create my new servlet. So you can create a servlet object, you can instantiate it outside of a web container, no problem there. But in order to invoke the doGet method, I need to have a request and a response that actually behave like real request and response objects. So I will create mock versions of those interfaces, and there is a special, well, not special, there's a method from the Mockito API, the Mockito library, for creating these mock objects. And so I'm going to mock out a couple things. I'm going to say, hey, give me an object that behaves like an HTTP response, HTTP server response, request, sorry, HTTP server request, a response, and also a print writer. Because the print writer is the thing I want to verify that nothing is ever written to it. So I create mock one of those. Now this is the print writer object that ultimately is going to be used by the code when it calls response.getWriter. So here, the write all dictionaries method takes the response and calls the getWriter method. What I'm providing it is this mock response, and I need to program this mock response object to say, hey, listen, when your getWriter method is invoked, then return my mock print writer. This is some next level stuff, and I can tell you, the first time people see this, like, what the hell is this? It's kind of crazy, but it works, and it allows you to test something very complex, like a servlet, using very simple, comparatively simple unit test code. So basically, I've created my object under test here. I've created a bunch of mock objects that I use to interact with the test. I'll get to your question in a moment, Shirishi. Now I'm going to perform an operation. I'm going to say, hey, do get with this mock servlet request that has no values for its parameters, and send it in a mock response that has a print writer that has a mock object here. And so then it just calls the code as normal. And then the code over here on the right will interact with all of those objects, but they're going to be mock objects, but the code over here doesn't care. All it knows is it's got something that is a print writer, it's got something that is an HTTP servlet response, it's just going to interact with them. And it does that. And then it returns, and along the way, these mock objects keep track of how they were interacted with. And then you can interrogate them after the fact. And you can say things like, okay, hey, listen, verify that the print writer's print line method is never invoked with any string. Like, hey, listen, I never, make sure that when I invoke my doGet, nothing, no one did anything with that print writer. And similarly, you can verify that the set status method of the response was invoked with SCOK, which ends up happening right here. So this is a way, again, you set up these mock objects, you send them into your code under test, they get interacted with, and then you can ask them afterwards, like, how was your trip? Did you go here? Did you go, right? You can do that. And this is really powerful, because what it allows you to do is test code that normally couldn't be tested. Right? For many years, there was all this logic inside servlets which never had a unit test. you had to like refactor everything out, which is probably a fine practice, but it made things kind of ugly, and you could never, if you're doing anything complex with the with the request or with the response, you always had to abstract that out and test that separately. This way, you can actually send in the actual object types, and the code under test over here on the right is none the wiser. So that's this first test. Let's look at another test that does some more interesting things. Here is a test that adds one word to the dictionary. So it's going to do a couple of things. It's going to interact with the servlet in a couple of ways. The first time is going to do a post with a request and a response that simulates having putting in a word in a definition. And then it's going to, okay, I guess it only interacts with it once. Yes, but what we're going to do is make sure that we can, when we add it, the word is added and that the appropriate information is written to the response and the right code happens. So now we need to have more complex mock objects. So once again, we are mocking our request and our response, but now we need to have, now there are going to be more interactions with them, and so we need to train them to respond appropriately. So we're going to say, hey, when request.get parameter is invoked with a value of word, then return our test word. Similarly, when request.get parameter is invoked with the definition parameter, then return our test definition. This is, mocking the interaction that happens when you use the HTML form and you enter in a word and a definition. But instead of actually running all of that inside having run all that inside of a servlet, it is simply providing the same kind of HTTP servlet that Jetty would, but it's just doing it here with these mock objects. So that's how you mock the request. When you mock the response, you'll have a response object. And now we're once again going to say, hey, listen, there's a print writer that is returned when get writer is called. But now we want to find out what text was written to that print writer. So what do we do? Well, now instead of mocking out the print writer, we send in a real print writer. It's a fine thing to do. And we wrap it around a string writer. A string writer is a implementation of the writer interface that writes to a string. I think we saw this a couple weeks ago. And so now you've got this special print writer. Okay. Now remember, the code over here on the right doesn't really care what the print writer writes to. When a real HTTP servlet response is sent in, the print writer writes to ultimately, I don't know, there's some buffer in memory or to a socket, or I don't know what it does, who cares, right? But here what we're going to do is we're going to have it write to a string writer so that later on we can interrogate what was written to find out if it's what we expected. So here's where we set up our mock print writer. When we configure our response object, say, hey, listen, when the writer for the response is invoked, then return this particular print writer. Finally, we're going to invoke our code under test. We're going to call it do post. And we're going to send it the mock request and the mock response. But once again, the code over here doesn't care that they're mocks. It's going to interact with them. It's going to interact with the objects just like you'd expect. And then we're going to interrogate them. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to say, hey, get the text that was written to the print writer via the string writer. And then say, hey, make sure that it contains the result of calling this defined as words, which is exactly what happened. Sorry. Which is exactly what we'd expect to be written to that print writer. The other thing that we want to do is we want to get the status code. And we saw how to do it before, but here's another way to do it. Mockito has this API called argument capture. And the whole idea is that what it'll do is it will capture the value that a method was invoked with, or the value of a parameter that a method was invoked with. So you can create one of these argument captures for an integer, and this is how you can capture the value of the status code. You can say, hey, verify that the response was invoked, had its status method invoked, and the value of that, I'm going to capture that into this argument capture right here. And now we can just use plain old ham-crest asserts. We can say, hey, assert that the value of that status code was indeed 200, was SCOK. And then finally, we want to make sure that the dictionary was updated. And so we added, we haven't seen this yet, but here on the servlet, there is a get definition method, which is just for testing. And you give it a word, and it returns the definition of that word. It basically, exposes the internals of the dictionary. This is great for testing. And so you say, hey, great, yeah, make sure that the current definition of that word is equal to the definition that I expected. So again, we're using this mock API, pretty advanced stuff, but look, you just write the test. And actually, it's so much faster to write the servlet this way, as opposed to like making a change in your servlet and restarting a web server and then hitting it again with the loading the URL again with your browser. It's way faster to develop your code this way. And also, when you run this one, it passes. Let's say that out. So I encourage you to use test-driven development to develop your servlet. Really, this shows you how to do a get, shows you how to do a post. I think most of everything that you need is here. It's a matter of understanding it and then adapting it for the airline application. I'll say that actually you'll be able to develop this faster if you do it. I know there might be like a lot to learn about Mockito and exactly how all of this works, but let me tell you, all the back and forth of like having to change the server, change the client, it gets really slow. You'll be able to go much faster if you write automated test scripts. Okay, there was a question that Shriyoshi asking. Why not mocking text dumper? Great question. First of all, text dumper is used only by the internals of the servlet. It's not something that's exposed. So you don't pass in the text dumper. It's something that this code uses itself. So really, if all you're doing is testing the do get and do put, the text dumper is used, but you can use a real text dumper because it itself doesn't depend on these servlet objects. So I don't think that's why you don't need to mock it. It really ends up being just an implementation detail when it's used in this context. Now, I suppose, yeah, I mean, I was going to say, I suppose you could test your text dumper itself using mock objects. Yeah, probably not. I mean, like, while it might be possible, it's probably not advisable. Because if we go back and look at like, if we look at our, like the text dumper test. Here, actually, here's a great example of how, let me just put this over to right. Oops. Here, we did something similar in that the text dumper just takes a writer. Right? We talked about this a couple weeks ago. Doesn't care what kind of writer it is actually provided. It just creates a writer. And so here in this test, we want to have a unit test for the text dumper. We just send in a string writer. And what that allows us to do is to very easily get at the text that was written. Just that way. The mock objects are kind of like that too, right? You pass in an implementation of your HTTP servlet response, I guess in this case, which makes it very easy to get at things like, hey, what was the status that was called with it? Or hey, my mock print writer is like, yeah, tell me, what was actually printed there. So the concepts in testing those two objects are similar, even though the implementation is quite different. Did I answer your question, Shriyoshi? I'm not sure it did. It did. Okay, good. Any questions about how to use mock objects with your servlet unit tests? Okay.
Sorry,
Yeah.
could you go over line 37? Again, the verify that the set status is.
Right. So verify is is like asserting something that's true. So basically, what you do, and the syntax of this is admittedly wacky, right? Because you're calling this verify method, and you're sending a response object, and then you're calling the set status. Sorry, there's lots of banging in the classroom. I don't know if it's coming along, coming through on the microphone or not. Basically, what you're saying is that I want to verify that not only was the set status method of the response invoked, but it was invoked with the value of scok. So if I had changed this to sc not found, and I ran the test, it fails because it says, hey, I wanted it to be called with 404, but instead I had all these interactions with it, including a set status of 200.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense. So it's not necessarily like verifying that a certain value, like a residual effect happened, just that it was invoked in a certain way.
Yeah, I mean, it's
Okay.
honestly doing the same thing as what we do down here with this argument captor. Here, though, you use an argument captor to get the value, and then you can use like a hamcrest assert to assert that it equals scok.
Got it. Okay, that makes
Like
sense. Thank you.
the same thing. Yeah. Nice. Okay. So on to Hiroshi's other question, which is, okay, I understand the servlet now. How do I invoke it from the command line? So now let's take a look at what happens on the command line. I'm going to, I still have it running. So this is just as a reminder, you have a command line program here, and it prints a dictionary when you've got nothing. Otherwise, if you just put one item, you get a definition, and then a long way to run. That gives the definition, and now it's there. So this is a Java command line program that does all the same thing that we saw with the with that form. Now let's take a look at the diagram again. So here you're just running your project 5 main, and it has a class called Airline REST client that makes the HTTP requests and processes the response. Right, so this is basically doing the same work that your browser does. As a matter of fact, I could probably augment this diagram and have the web browser there, and have it load a URL from the web container from Jetty. So let's take a look at that Airline REST client, because that's the thing that does all of the heavy lifting. All right, Airline REST client. So the Airline REST client uses a class called HTTP Request Helper to do most of the heavy lifting. And so I thought about it, and it's like I don't want you all to have to like learn how to like create the URL and post the content. Just a little too much. I'll give you something that I think helps. I'll let you be the judge about how helpful that really is. But the whole idea is the Airline REST client is basically it creates URLs and then it sends the GET or the POST request and then processes the response. And an Airline REST client is created with a host and a port. And here we use and then when you do that, it provides an HTTP request helper. And let's just take a look at this that has that particular URL. So this is a class that I wrote to help you. Basically, what it does is it has methods where you say, hey, it represents a URL, and do a get with these parameters. And then it's the thing that uses the Java util URL, sorry, the Java net URL class to actually go and make the connection and everything like that. I figured I would do all of this so you don't have to. Similarly for a post and delete. I don't know if I would put on here or not. I think I do. And it takes care of encoding the parameters the right way. And like, I didn't want you to have to write all this stuff yourself. And so what you do is you invoke the get method, and it returns an object called a response. And a response has, well, basically, you can get the status code, and you can get the content, and you can get the number of lines. And so then, if you just use this helper, then you can basically say, hey, for this URL, send it these parameters, I get the response object back, and I can then look at what the servlet sent me. And so by using this HTTP request helper, what the REST Airline client does is it provides a pretty nice Java interface to the REST API, to those URLs. So the whole idea is you create one of these, you give it the host and port, and then it gives you methods like get all dictionary entries. Okay, and how is this thing implemented? Well, actually, get all dictionary entries and returns a map of a string to a string. So what is that going to do? Well, what's the HTTP thing you need to invoke? Well, you need to do a get with no parameters. And so the way you represent that here is that you use the HTTP helper, you call the get method, and you send it no parameters. That'll return a response. And then what do I do? Well, I'm going to get the content from that response and then use it to create a text parser and return the dictionary, the map of strings that I read from that response. Along the way, before I do that, I check to see if the HTTP status was not okay. And if it was not, then I get the content of the response and I throw something called a REST exception. So this is sort of a Java thing to do, right? I mean, it's not very Java-ish to return an error code. Instead, if something is wrong, well, you throw an exception. And then the calling code can catch that exception. But as you can see here, I am purposefully using the language of the assignment, of the application, of the dictionary application, and I'm not saying get something from a URL, right? I am abstracting things, so that the project 5 main, which ultimately uses this, has a more fluent language to speak in. And I'm hiding all of the details, I'm encapsulating all of the details of dealing with the HTTP requests, in other objects. Right, this is a nice separation of concerns. And letting the HTTP object, which can be used for like any REST API, letting it do its thing, and then providing a nice Java interface around all that returns the appropriate type. Similarly, I have a get definition for one word. And so what do we do here? Well, now we will call HTTP get again, but instead of passing in an empty map like we did up here, we'll pass in a map that has one pair. The word parameter, which is word, will be whatever it is that was passed in here. We'll again check to make sure there's something wrong about it. We'll get its content, and then we will then we will create a text parser from that content, parse that to get a map. And I should probably put this into a variable, something like call this dictionary. Dictionary with one word, and then get the one word. Now, I hope that you're starting to see how you can evolve these methods into things that'll work with your airline application. right? So instead of words, you'll be sending like airline names, and instead of your text parser, it'll be like your XML parser, and then you'll get your, so instead of returning a string, it'll return a flight, or actually it'll probably return like an airline with a subset of the flight. So like here, it'll be, you know, the entire airline, right? I'm trying to sort of, you know, the idea here is that I'm hoping to give you enough out of the box so you can map the abstractions from the dictionary to the airline, and then start migrating your code that way. You know, I hope that you don't just like delete all of this and start over again. This might be, you know, it's meant to be an exercise in evolving code, not necessarily rewriting everything from scratch. And then for adding a dictionary entry with a different given wording definition, oh, actually, it's kind of hard to read. There we go. There we go. That's easy to read. I'm going to call the post method of the HTTP. I'm going to send it a map with the word and the definition. And really, the response, the only thing I care about is whether or not it was an error. There's no real dictionary data to process there. And then for testing purposes, I have remove all dictionary entries, which calls the delete. It does a delete invocation of the HTTP URL. Sorry, it makes a delete request of the URL, and then it does this thing. So that's what the Airline REST client does. Now, sorry, any questions about this? Or sort of like what you've seen or how it's structured? Okay, so this is code, and there's logic there, and you want to test it. Now, I'm pretty sure someone heard me say the word test, and I'm like, oh no, not again. Oh yes, again, because there are tests for the Airline REST client. Airline REST client test. Okay. Now, yeah. This is another test that uses Mockito to exercise the code, but this time, instead of mocking out the, when we mocked out the servlet, what we were mocking, sorry, when we had unit tests for the servlet, what we mocked out was the HTTP request and HTTP servlet request and HTTP servlet response. Now what we're going to do to have some mock tests of the Airline REST client, unit tests of the Airline REST client, is that we're going to mock out the request helper. So basically what we're going to do is verify that when we invoke something, when we invoke like the get method, for instance, the value that's returned is what we're going to mock out is the content returned by the servlet, right? So there is no servlet running now. Instead, we're just going to say, oh yeah, right. When you do an HTTP get with nothing, here's your content, right? And so then we do that so that we can write a test like this. So we can say, hey, here is like my test dictionary with this word and definition right here. I'm going to mock out the HTTP request helper, and I'm going to say, hey, listen, when the get method is invoked, then I'm going to return this method. The value of this method is like turn this dictionary into some text. And what it does is it creates an synthetic HTTP request helper response that basically uses the text dumper to then generate the same content that the servlet would have otherwise, and it creates a response that way. This is an example that shows how you can create a unit test for the Airline REST client. It's mildly interesting, and you can certainly develop the airline REST client this way. As a matter of fact, it would be nice and fast to do so. You can do a bunch of mocking, and you know, I think this is an okay way to do it, but it's possible. I wanted to show it to you. But what's more interesting is the airline REST client integration test. Now, we've been working with integration tests since week 1, right? Remember you saw your project 1 IT, where what we're integrating with is the command line main, and we had that invoke main method that would take the name of the class, and here's a bunch of like command line arguments, and it would capture standard output and capture standard error, and then you could interrogate all of that. And technically, I think if you squint and you can say, yeah, that's an integration test. But integration tests are usually, and more traditionally, something that requires a lot of setup and some amount of teardown. And you're usually integrating big things. Sounds like a saxophone. They're integrating big things. And in Project 5, you have a big thing in your web server. And so what the integration tests do is actually will test a running web server. Bagpipes? I don't know. It's just, sorry, it's very distracting. It's tuning up. Anyway, sorry. I'm getting a little loopy. So, oh, actually, I do have. Okay, so I'm running my Jetty now, and so the first thing, so I've got these tests, and all of these tests create a new airline REST client for the host and the port, and then it invokes methods of that client. So the first thing it's going to do is clear all the dictionary entries. It's going to clear everything out. And you remember what this thing does? It goes and calls the delete method of the, calls the delete method. And then what I'm going to do is I am going to say, hey, an empty server contains no dictionary entries, which is actually just the same thing I did in the unit test, as you might recall. And here now, I'm actually going to test it against a running Jetty, because I'm using the airline REST client, which makes those HTTP requests. So I'm going to call get all dictionary entries. That'll return me a dictionary. I'm going to assert that the size of the dictionary is 0. Actually, I'll just go and do that. So I will I'll run that test right there, and let's see if it's got to compile everything. It runs it, and it removed all dictionary entries. Well, let's see if it actually did. So now if I go in and run this, no more dictionary entries. They're all gone now. Okay, I will run this next one, which asserts that an empty server contains no dictionary entries. Oops. And sure enough, it called get all dictionary entries, right? No exceptions were thrown, everything was okay, and the dictionary returned was empty. Okay, so now I've got another one which says define one word. So I'm going to create my airline REST client. Here's going to be my word and definition. I'm going to call the add dictionary entry method, which again, what does this thing do? It does an HTTP post. But you know what? This code doesn't care how it works. It just knows that it works. And then it's going to go and get the definition of the word I just added and assert that the definition that was returned is equal to the test definition that I expected. So I'm going to run this test. It passed. Well, let's see what we've got in our dictionary now. Yeah, there it is. Test word, test definition. Cool. Oh, here's another one. Okay, so I want to test that when the word is empty, is the word empty string, I get an exception is thrown. Right, because here again, the airline REST client, when something goes wrong, it will throw an exception. And as a matter of fact, I'm going to call add dictionary with this bogus, with bogus. That's right. Yeah, with a bogus word and definition, and I expect that a REST exception will be thrown. And the assert throws, which I think we talked about before, here it returns the exception that was thrown, which is nice because then you can interrogate it. and say, okay, great, I expected that your HTTP status code was 412, and that the message is this missing parameter. And actually, let me just try that from the command line and see what happens. So I pass an empty string, empty string. Yep, sure enough, I get, so this, this client doesn't catch the exception like it should. But it said, yep, the required word is missing. I guess it doesn't print the error code. I should make a change. I should make it do that. Anyway, the REST exception prints that. Let's see what the test does. Nice. So these the Airline REST client IT integration tests work against a running a running servlet, which is nice, right? You want to make sure that it actually works once it's deployed, and things like that. But the other thing that you can do is that these integration tests are also run when you do a Maven verify. So when you do a Maven w clean verify, it's still running in debugging mode, but don't worry about it. This will rebuild all of the code, and it will do what your other tests have done. It'll compile the source code. It will run the unit tests. It will, in this case, in addition to building a jar file, also build the web archive, the WAR file, and then it will start up a Jetty and run the integration tests against that Jetty. Make sure that everything passes, and it does. So this allows you to have what I consider more real integration tests that work against a running Jetty. Any questions about the Airline REST client or your options for testing it? Yep. What time is it? I want to walk through one more piece of code, then we'll figure out what to do that. We'll take a break. Okay, so this is the Airline REST client and its integration test. There is, one more thing. Question. Is it still 75% Jacoco coverage for this project? It is. So that's a good point. Between the integration tests and the unit tests, you'll need to get 75% code coverage. Actually, not as hard as you think. It's there's well, I suppose you've got the logic for things like searching. All that can be implemented using plain old unit tests. But yep, it's still 75% coverage for this test for this project. Now, going back, we've talked about the Airline REST client. Let's talk about Project 5. Oops. Project 5. Project 5 is actually pretty straightforward. It's a plain old command line program that, after parsing the command line, looking for the host name, port, the word in the definition, and doing a little bit of error checking about making sure that the host name and port are specified. What does it do? It uses the Airline REST client, and so it creates the Airline REST client and then interacts with it. And so then it'll do things like, hey, listen, if the word is null, then we print all the word definition pairs, calls get all dictionary entries, gets the dictionary, and then uses the pretty printer to dump it out to the command line. If word is not null, but the definition is, then we go call get definition from the client. And here again, the client will call HTTP to we'll use the HTTP helper to actually make the calls to the server, and then it prints a single dictionary entry. Otherwise, both word and definition are not null. We will add the entry to the dictionary, on the server, and then print out a little message. And if we get any problems, I should probably have a REST exception here too. I'm gonna do that. Any exceptions that occur, I'll simply issue an error with information about that exception. So the whole idea here is that by having proper separation of concerns, you have pretty focused and straightforward code. You want your classes to do one thing and to do it well. So in the case of your airline REST client, it knows how to interact with the REST API, calling, doing those HTTP gets and HTTP posts, and dealing with the assembling of the parameters and interpreting the output, interpreting the results, and then returning the right types of objects. And then in Project 5, it deals with command line stuff, parsing the command line, and then just using the Airline REST client to interact, to do its thing, and then print out the appropriate results. So this should be super familiar to you. And then just the same way there was an Airline REST client IT, there is a Project 5. There is a Project 5 IT, which again runs against a running Jetty. And it does the same thing. It's probably got a very similar test, right? First thing you do is remove all the mappings, and then it makes sure that the error messages are output appropriately, and then it tests an empty server. It tests that we oh, I should say that. I should not catch that. Good to know, that will fail. It will verify that if I try to look for a word with no definition, then you get a REST exception. And that's not what you really want to do. That's what the test. That's the way the code works right now. And then here's how you add a definition into the dictionary using the main program, right? You call it with 2 arguments, host port, and then the word in the definition. Make sure nothing was written to standard out, and that what was written, nothing was written to standard error. Make sure that was written to standard out is what you expected, and then you go and look it up again from the server. Make sure it's what you got, and then then we look at all of them and make sure that it contains what you expect. The one thing I didn't point out is that because this test, the methods must be run in a certain order, right? You have to remove all mappings before you assert that an empty server has no mappings. And the way that you enforce that is use this test method order annotation on your test. And because I have like test 0, test 1, test 2, it will order it by method name. Sorry, specify test method order by method name. And that will invoke them in the order, in their alphabetical order, lexicographical order. So run all those. Oops. It didn't. Oh, could not load class. Yeah, JD was there. Yeah. Let's do clean. Okay, now let's run Jetty again. Okay. Now let's run the system. Oh, look for it. Yeah. No, it doesn't load. Really? Section refused. Now let's run Joey again. Okay. Cool, and everything passed. Which all the ones that passed right there. So anyway, here's another example of a real integration test that interacts with the servlet as it's running. This allows you to exercise your code running, in real, for real in production, and it augments and complements the unit tests that you write for your servlet and for, in this case, the Airline REST client. I suppose you could mock out the REST client for the main, but it's probably not worth doing that. So I think anyway. So this is what all comes out of the box. That's a lot. Any immediate questions that come to mind? What am I doing with my life? Is it not too late to change my major? No, this is good stuff. I hope you're. I know it's a lot, but I think this is the advanced part of advanced programming with Java. Okay. Let's take let's take a 10-minute break. Saying more than that, everybody's going to see myself. 10-minute break, and we'll come back and let's talk about strategies for how to evolve this to start doing some airline and flight stuff. I think that'll be a good way to end it tonight. So I'll see you at 7:50. Okay, so we are back. Where's this? There we go. So I thought just sort of conclude this deep, in-depth introduction to Project 5. Let's take some time and explore how we might evolve this out-of-the-box application into something that manages airlines. I don't know how far we're going to get. We'll do this for like 40 minutes until about 8:30 or maybe 8:45 or something like that. But the idea here is that we can start to see how to use test-driven development to evolve and refactoring to evolve our code. So I'm just going to check in the changes that I've got. Oops, what's here? I don't need this change anymore. So yeah, okay, let's sort of make a clean slate. Let's see here. This is going to be, oh yeah. Just do code formatting to make it easier. Okay. So get all that committed. Okay, so the first thing, let's look at the Airline servlet. So this is probably like some of the more complex code, and let's look at the Airline servlet test. Now, let's look at the assignment. I think the first thing that I want to get working is the post. I want to be able to create a new flight. And for tonight, I think to get started, basically what I'm going to do is going to say, let's take the word, let's convert the word parameter to the airline name parameter and the definition parameter to the flight number. So I'll let you all figure out how to do source, depart, destination, arrive. Let's start there and see how it goes. So I'm first going to do a bunch of refactoring. So I'm going to use the refactor rename. So for me, that's Shift F6. instead of word parameter, I'm going to call it airline name parameter. And I want that to be airline. All right, that's the name of it. Yep, airline. And instead of definition, I'm going to have this be flight number parameter. Flight number parameter. And I'm going to call that flight number. Okay. Actually, that probably changes a lot of code. Let me just, let's see here. Do I want to, you know what? No, I'm not going to bother running too many tests here. I'm going to assume you're factoring the right thing. So I'm going to say rename dictionary parameters to airline parameters. Now let's look at the test. Initially, servlet contains no entries. I don't know how interesting that one is. I'm trying to think. I mean, what would you do? You'd ask for an airline if it doesn't exist. That's a 404. Maybe. Yeah, maybe actually maybe that's what we should do. So rename this to. Oh wait, when you do a get for an airline that doesn't exist, it returns a 404. So actually getting is return all the flights. So getting flights for non-existent airline returns 404. So I'm going to create an empty servlet, mock request response, my request. I'm going to, so I'm going to borrow this code down here, the airline name. Will be non-existent. Let's call it airline. It clearly doesn't exist yet. And I want to assert, let's see here, is anything written to the response? I don't think I really care. I want to say the status is going to be 404, which is not found. Okay, so if I run this, what do I get? Oops, run this, what do I get? It might already work, I'm not sure. Oh, looks like it does work. Okay, well that's good to know. Okay, let's change this add one word to dictionary to add flight in new airline. Okay, so we're not going to have word and definition anymore. We're going to have airline name, we're going to have airline, and this will be easy to understand, airline, and then flight number. Now, because this is the servlet, everything's a string. So we're going to have a flight number of 123. Oops. That used to be definition. I'm going to name it to flight number so that this thing gets renamed also. And here, yeah, I guess what I could, what I expect is actually what I expect here. I don't think when I do a when I do a post, I don't really care what's written to the what's written. So I will get rid of this assert here. But oh, actually no, I don't. I do want this. This is going to be, this is meant to be my XML. Now I'm not going to implement all the XML stuff, but I will say this. Let's see here. I'm going to turn this. This is going to be the XML here, and I want to say that it's going to contain string airline, and it's going to contain the string flight number. and I want this thing to be an SCOK. And okay, this is gonna be a little different now. Actually, let's just, this might pass. Let me see. Oh, I keep running it the wrong way. So I'm just doing this on Windows and the key bindings are different. It did pass. Okay, well that's neat. But now I don't want to have a get definition here on the servlet. This is where I want to get the airline or the flight. So let's see here. Now, so instead of get definition, I'm going to say get airline. And this is going to be the, why do I name this? I want this to be the airline name. Okay, that's the airline name, and then the flight number. Yeah, I'm gonna say this is gonna be flight number as string. This is gonna be 1, 2, 3, but really, what I want is a flight number. It's 1, 2, 3, and then this is gonna be string.value of flight number. And because what I really want out of here is, I want this to be an airline. Yep. Oh yeah, which I don't have here. So I need to copy the airline. I need to copy the airline and flight classes from my old project. Airline and flight classes, airline and flight classes. I'm going to copy those. And I'm going to move them next to my airline servlet here in my personal package. I think that'll work. Yes, add those to Git. Thank you very much. Airline and flight. Okay, so now it recognizes airline. That's good. But it's complaining that get airline returns a string. Well, that is true. And actually, though, assert that airline.getName equals to airline name. So why is that? Okay, fair enough. And then there should be one flight, and that's airline.getFlights.next, whatever. And then assert that the flight.getNumber equals to the flight number. Okay, so now I wrote my test and it doesn't compile. We're definitely in the green, or definitely in the red here. So now I got to change this get airline. So instead of using a dictionary, I need to turn this into the thing that's going to store all my airlines, I guess. So get airline. So instead of word here, it's going to be airline name. And instead of dictionary, I'm going to call this airlines. And it's going to return an airline. Now, this is probably going to break code all over the place, because airlines is not a map of string. Now it's a map of airlines. And now let's just go and look at all the errors this causes. Okay. So here, okay, so like a do post. This is going to, oh, okay, let's change some more of this. So you can see what we're doing is we're just refactoring and we're changing. This is where those refactoring tools in IntelliJ really help you out, because it just makes it much easier to change all the nomenclature to match what you expect. So this is the airline name. And then definition becomes the flight number string. Okay, and so now here, you say airline, when you get the airline, so airline, so get airline name. If airline equals null, then airline equals new airline, oops. And then it's the airline name, and then store that in this.airlines. And then we want to put the new flight and put it in the airline. So airline dot add flight, new flight with, oh, it doesn't have a number. It does not. Okay, we will make it have one. It's got number. It's field, number, make it final. Oops. Yeah, I can take a parameter. Yep. Is that good? Oh yeah, we need to parse it as a string. We need to parse it. Parse it as a float number string. Nice. Okay, let's see if this works. Probably the other things we can compile, like things different. Maybe not. Oh yeah, like this. Right definition. Yeah, this is not word, this is airline name. And then this becomes a definition. This is the airline. This is the type of airline now. And then, oh, actually, you know what? I don't even know if we need this method anymore. This one doesn't make sense because we're not ever writing one single flight. Maybe this is the one that where we, yeah, maybe we dump all over the airline. Maybe that's what we do now. Yeah. And this is where we're going to need the equivalent of an XML dumper. I don't have one of those. I guess I can just yeah, I guess I can involve my text dumper to dump the airline. You've already got one, so I don't think that's terribly interesting here. So let's just print. Well, let's just leave it like that and see what happens. Please build now, or it's still build. Yeah, I still got one more. And write all dictionary entries. Yeah, again, we'll fix that when we need to. Okay. So let's run our test again. Oh, add flight isn't implemented. Okay, I do a little bit more work on airline then. This will be return the stop flights. Final. And then add flight is going to be stop flights dot add flight. Okay, I'm surprised that worked. How did that work? Let's see here. So then, oh yeah, we didn't interrogate anything about the print writer. No, we did. Really? The XML was, what did I write? Oh, maybe that did work. Okay, actually, I'm just going to debug that to see what the XML is. What's the XML here? Oh yeah, define airline as 1, 2, 3. That would do it. Okay, well, so then you'd want to do the right thing there and actually have XML and probably have better validation right there. But this is good enough for now. So this is the kind of thing that you want to do, right? Just go through and figure out, okay, hey, I've got this piece of code over here that somebody else wrote. How can I adapt it to do something different? And that's all part of the assignment, right? You're not cheating when I give you this stuff so that you have not a running start, maybe a hobbling start. And so that you can figure out what you need to change. And it's basically changing things that used to be strings, like in the dictionary, to your airline that has flights in it. And of course, along the way, you'll need to do more stuff about printing out your your airlines to do more things that are more interesting. So that's how. So let's see here. The servlet. Yeah, I think this sort of gets us some of the way. So I'm sure things are broken, but begin refactoring the airline servlet to work with airlines and flights. Airlines and flights. Okay. And of course, I have to do a lot more, but let's see what other stuff we work on. The airline REST client test. I've got no idea how this thing's going to do. So let's run that. Oh, interesting. Okay. Really? So here, oh, because this is the mock. This one's probably not so interesting. So yeah, so let me run the server. Actually, this even run. Let's see if we can get if it starts up. Okay, start it up. So now let's look at the client, the airline REST client integration test. And so we need to change here. So remove all dictionary entries. Then this becomes remove all airlines. Here again, I rename everything just so that it makes it starts to look like the right application, and so I can start reasoning about what these things should do. Airlines. Actually, is there a get all? There's not really a get all. Yeah, there's not really a get all airlines functionality, right? You always have to provide the name of an airline on the URL. So that one's not going to make much of any sense. So let's see here. Define one word, then becomes create first flight. Okay, so let's see here. Again, instead of test word, this becomes airline name, and test definition then becomes flight number. So again, by renaming everything, hopefully this helps you then figure out what the code is supposed to do for the airline. So instead of add dictionary entry, it is add flight. And here, when we want to get the definition, it's not getting a definition, it's getting the airline. And then this returns the XML, and it will be a string. And then here the XML, we want to say contains string, flight number, and then empty word throws exception. Yeah, there might be an equivalent to that. I'll let you figure out how to best do the error checking. So like, what do these methods do. Okay, so create first flight. Okay, so expected string airline, but was null. Well, let's see here. Why is that null? So get airline. Okay, so what does get airline do? Get airline. As it says airline name, this passes the one. Remember, oh, and then it gets the text parser. Oh yeah, right. We didn't. Oh no, actually no. Sorry. Get airline should return an airline. Airline, and then it should be airline dot get name. Flights get name equal to airline name. And then you go figure it out. Airline dot get flights dot next dot get number equal to flight number as string. And then we can probably just inline this. There we go. That's right. Okay, so now get airline. It's quite complaining because it doesn't return an airline. Well, it should. And that is not word, that is airline name. And here, boy, I don't, it's got to turn this into an airline. So maybe I do need to have like, oh, maybe I can use a text parser. I can just be smart about it. Okay, so dictionary one word dot get airline name. No. Okay, so parser. Gotcha. Okay, so I need to change my text parser to return an airline. And here it just has dot dot dot. Okay, that's cool. So instead of word, this is an airline name and flight. Okay. Here again, you'll use your real text parser, which like you've been working with, and or actually you use the XML parser, which will be nice and robust. I'm sort of making stuff as I go along here. And then let's see here. Let's do that here. That's what I'll do. I need to create an airline, or I need to declare an airline. Oh, so instead of a map, I'm going to want airline. Start out with a null value and say if airline equals null, airline equals airline name, and then airline dot add flights, new flights, flight number, flight number as string. Of course, you all want to do better error checking than I do, but I don't think this to work. And then return airline. And then change the return type, make parse return airline. Three related problems. Okay, airline, that's client. Ooh, all sorts of good stuff. Okay, so there is no get all airlines. I do not need this anymore. Here, okay, this is where I want to just say return parser.parse. Yep. Oops. Okay. What else? Oh, look, there it is. Here in the main. Okay. So the main, I'm just going to just kind of, I don't know what should I do. I'm just gonna do some stuff right now. Yeah, that's so airline is required, so that's gonna be an error. Airline is required. Otherwise, I'm going to print the entire airline or something. Oh, I got a pretty print the airline. Let's see here. I need to. Oh, sorry. It's nothing. Oh, this should be airline name. This will be flight numbers. And so now we want to, yeah, this is going to be the entire airline. And so then client.get airline name. This is a variable, and we're just going to say, let's see, okay, okay, and then the flight. Yes, okay. Um, more. Okay. What's this one? Oh, I probably need to actually. Oh, did I change anything on the server side? I don't know. Oh, doesn't matter yet. Empty server contains no airlines. Yep, I can't really test that. I might need to redeploy my servlet because I can't remember if I changed anything on the. It's something parts. What is this? Text temper parse test. Oh, okay. Oh, this is actually a test for in text temper text filter. Okay, so I gotta get this working too. Empty map can be dumped and parsed. It has to be empty airline. No, no, actually, I don't support that. Yeah, no, I don't. Oh, I guess that's what this is. Okay. Well, let's say airline with one flight can be dumped and parsed. You won't have to write this because you already have this kind of stuff already working, but I don't. Okay, so this map becomes an airline. And okay. Airline name. Flight number. That. So that creates your airline. I'm going to add to that flight. Number, and I'm going to return airline there, and I will say assert that we read that bit name equals to airline name, and we're going to assert that airline that was read the flights dot next bit number equal to flight number. So I'm testing my text number and text parser right now, which I think I'll need to do. So airline parse airline. So here I'm not even doing servlet stuff. So sorry if it's not terribly interesting. I'm trying to do things as quickly as possible here. Okay, so now the dumper, we'll need to dump an airline. So let's change this to the airline. And then let's call this airline. Oops, call it airline. And now, okay, so for the print writer, so not for, what was the format? Something like, I think it was airline name, airline.name. And then for every flights in airline.get flights, we print airline name and flight.get number. No problem. This is like dictionary is text. Airline REST client. This is another, oh, this is this mock thing. Okay. Here it is. Okay, I've got to create another one that's airlines with one thing. And so that create another one of these. Yep. And then a map of it'll be the servlet, yeah, with that airline number. So airline servlet dot airline of that with the airline name. Then return, not return as text, but that will be airline as text. Airline. And assert that client that the airline of airline equal to this is, and call that red, and then have that the same thing as this. I think airline. Get to the parser tag. Yes, there it is. Why not? Dump text can be parsed. Oh, that's kind of what this thing is. I'll need this text. Okay, once more. right? So this is a lot of refactoring, and it's just in order, it's what it takes to get the code to compile. Oh, good, that worked. Okay, so how about this? Does this work? Okay. So basically what I'm doing is, I'm sort of keeping things super simple to begin with. I am just taking, the vast majority of code that's already there and just saying, no, the airline, the dictionary word is now the airline, and the definition is now the flight number. This is how I do, like, two easy parameters just to start renaming everything. I wonder where I stand right now. Like, well, I can't remember what I was working on, quite frankly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run a clean verify to just see how the tests run. And what I'm looking to do is sort of get to a checkpoint where things are relatively stable. Let's see if the integration tests pass. Sure they won't. Yeah, they won't fail. Oh yeah, right. I think I tried to. Okay, so test 2 empty server on project 5 IT. Oops. Yeah, I'm going to ignore that. And what did the other ones pass? Two errors, one. Okay, well maybe that was one of the things. I'll try it again. Oh, I think that was. No, and because I'm running the integration test, I mean, things just take a little longer, right? I mean, that whole, this takes a solid, I don't know, like 45 seconds. It wasn't that long to wait. But compared to running the unit tests, it's pretty slow. So let's do that. They can invoke airline by getting because airline is not fit first flight. So, and that was in the airline REST client IT. Oh, I'm surprised by that. Airline REST client IT fit first flight. So here I add flights with that, and then when I get the airline, it returns null. Okay, well, so then what I'm going to do here, and I'm going to do it pretty quickly because I'm getting tired, is I'll run, actually, let me do it clean, and then I'm going to run Jetty. I'm going to debug Jetty to see if I can figure out what's going on here. I could probably, actually, yeah, this is kind of surprising because my unit tests for the servlet passed. So I wonder what's going on here. So let me just take a moment to see if I can figure this out. So let's see here. Here I do an add flight, and then I do a get airline. So if I go back to the servlet, I want to stop on both my do post and my do get. Let's just see if anything weird happens. Okay, so now I'm going to run that test. No, seriously? But I did the. I did the Maven clean. How come you can't find the. Okay. Where's more here? Okay, null pointer. Oh, and it didn't. Oh, I didn't attach with my debugger. That's why I didn't hit any of the breakpoints. That would do it. Okay, so now I'm gonna run my tests again. So this is getting wacky, right? So in IntelliJ, I'm now debugging the Jetty, and I'm running my tests. So lots of stuff happening here at the same time. Okay, so the first one passed. Now I'm doing the post. So I got the airline name, I got the flight, I got the airline, it's creating the new airline, it's adding the new flight. I don't print, okay, so here's the bug. I don't print the, I don't use the text dumper here as I should. Well, actually, no, I don't need to, actually, no, I was wrong. I don't need to do the text dumper here because back in my test, yeah, it's the get airline, which appears to be problematic. So let's see here, airlines, put problematic. Okay, so there's that. Okay, now I'm doing the get again. Here, actually, no, sorry, now I'm doing the get. So I get the parameter. Oh, I haven't changed this. This is probably like all bogus. Oh, I guess I don't have a. Oh yeah, I totally removed that code. Well, that would do it, and that's why nothing was written back. Okay, so now I need to change this. So actually, I should probably write a unit test for this. But you know what? I'm tired. I'll go home. As to all of you, I'm sure. So then, let's. I got the airline. So let's make a new text dumper. Dumper, text dumper, and then print writer. And we'll say dumper dot airline, and then we'll flush the print writer. To be sure. Okay. And so now, because I have changed my servlet code, I need to restart my Jetty. That will recompile that code and start it again. Okay, I'm going to try it without debugging and see what happens. Oops. Oh, expected. Okay, here is the bug in my test. Yeah, let's see here. Not string. I took it to be flight number. Once more. Okay, that passes. That's good. Let's see here. Let's run all of the integration tests and see what happens. Oops, instead of project 5, IT add definition through a, oh yeah, it didn't like something there, and that's fine. I am just going to disable this test for the moment and call it good enough for tonight. Okay, so all that seems to be passing. Now I'm going to run it here from command line, and if everything passes, then I think you've seen sort of what you need to do with the project. We've got it all here recorded. So after you finish your project 4 and you're starting to ponder your project 5, recommend that you take a look at this and see how to and spend the first little bit to just molding the dictionary application to something that's starting to look like an airline. Yay, and I'll pass. An airline application, and I think after that you'll find that it's kind of wash, rinse, repeat in places. I wouldn't call it deceptively simple, but it is. I think once you figure out the patterns, once you figure out how to do the mock testing, once you figure out how to get everything in terms of the airline. It'll work out pretty good. Okay. Ooh. Let's see here. Format the airline as text and get stuff working. Okay. Whew, super sweet. Hey, well, hey, thanks for sticking out at the end. Any final thoughts or questions? Oops.
Hi, I have actually one question.
Yeah.
Regarding the multiple airlines, now I think from project 5, we are accepting multiple airlines. So, like, does the XML file that we create in project 4, it will still have one airline, right?
That is correct. And actually, yeah, something that I didn't call out explicitly is that your servlet does not write any files to disk. You have already demonstrated that you know how to write files. So
Correct.
instead, what it does is it represents everything in memory as either objects or as strings. So, and as a matter of fact, I do not believe that any part of the API returns multiple airlines, but the servlet itself supports multiple airlines.
Okay, so basically memory can have a system like a dictionary, like
Yep.
a map which stores multiple airlines, but nothing goes into the files.
Correct. There are no files read or written to disk. All of the I/O happens over the HTTP connection, the socket connection back to the client.
Okay, so functionality for project 4, still it's like one airline per XML file.
Yes.
Okay, and one last thing, you open the DTD in the class, right? I tried to open it from the airline XML helper class, but then it says, gives me an option of open in browser. Can you just show it again? Like
Yeah, and yeah, there was a subtlety there. It was not the XML helper that I opened up. It was the airline. Sorry, it was the airline.xml. It was like valid airline.xml. It was here. So for whatever reason, actually I don't even know why, but IntelliJ is able to figure out that the airline.dtd is there.
Okay, yeah, that I
Yeah.
can try doing.
Give that a try. Let me know if it doesn't work. And yes, Matt, to answer your question, you are understanding this correctly. The multiple airlines are supported via the map data structure. So it's multiple airlines stored in memory.
Thank you.
No, thank you all. Great. There is a Project 5 channel on Slack for discussions about the project if you are pondering it. But the project itself isn't due for March 8th. That's 3 weeks? I think that's right, yeah. So we got to finish off your Project 4s first and then get on to Project 5. But next week, we will be diving into mob programming. I anticipate it'll be kind of like our first pair programming session where I'll set the stage. Please watch the mob programming lecture, but I'll do a little bit of review, and I'll think about whether or not we can maybe do an introductory mobbing exercise with me involved with the mob, and then but then you all will break out into your own mobs. I encourage people to be here in the classroom. If you are able and comfortable to come down to campus, I think it'd be good to experience mobbing in person. It might have a little easier communication than having everybody on Zoom. But again, as an attend anywhere class, the preference is yours. Okay, that's all I got for tonight. That was plenty. Have a good week, everybody. I'll see you later.